Wilson, Mary Catherine Ham, Brian Neiman, today's newsmakers, and you. The Morning Majority, 630.
WMAL.
7:37 on the Morning Majority. Later in the show, we have Representative Steve King and Doug Holtz-Eakin on economics. Right now, we turn to foreign affairs with KT McFarland of Fox News. She also has a show of her own on live.foxnews.com called DEFCON 3, Wednesdays at 2, so you can tune into that. How's it going, KT?
Everything's great, thank you.
Good. Tell me a little bit about what the defense community and perhaps Barack Obama himself are worried about leading up to 9/11.
Well, I think that there's no surprise that President Obama has come out and said what we're really concerned with is the lone wolf attacker. Al-Qaeda has been greatly diminished worldwide, and certainly the Al-Qaeda core, which is what was in Pakistan, Osama bin Laden, and the legacy of Osama bin Laden, those have been greatly reduced. And the worry is, like we saw with the Christmas Day bomber, the underwear bomber, like we saw with the Fort Hood shooter, like we saw with the Times Square attempted bomber, is that these guys operate singly, alone, maybe a small network, but it's the lone wolf, and because that's the guy you don't ever see coming.
Right. You
can't. Intelligence has a great difficulty in picking up, particularly somebody who is carrying a U.S. passport or green card. So when President Obama warns about it, it's really just putting together what the intelligence community has been telling us for the last 2 years. It's the lone wolf we can't see. He's the hardest to find. He's the guy who could cause great damage, and then marrying that up with the September 11th anniversary.
Well, is our best hope to just hope that they continue to be incompetent, or are we?
Yeah,
are there things we can do?
Well, I think it's to see something, say something. I live in New York City, and the mantra here is see something, say something. And you're never going to have an intelligence community that's going to find every lone wolf out there. But if everyone remains vigilant, somebody looks suspicious, if you see somebody underneath the Brooklyn Bridge taking pictures, chances are you want to report that person. If you see a suspicious package left somewhere, chances are you should immediately let authorities know.
But in the Norway situation, KT, there were some signs that were missed. I mean, he bought a lot of fertilizer, even though he was a farmer. The amount of fertilizer he bought should have sent off some alarm bells somewhere, especially when coupled with the fact that he had said some pretty outrageous things on the Internet. It should have been known to intelligence types in that country. I would assume we are looking for things like that.
Well, I think we are looking for things like that, but again, what are some of the most amazing things that have happened in uncovering, in preventing attacks? There was in New Jersey at Fort Dix. There was a group that was planning to attack Fort Dix, and what they did was they did training videos of themselves in rehearsing this, and then they took the training videos to a camera shop to have the videos developed. And the video developer guy is looking at the pictures and saying, wow, this looks kind of suspicious. I think I'm going to call the FBI. So sure enough, that guy called the FBI. The Fort Dix people were identified. They were arrested. They were dealt with. So it's often, the citizen, the average guy who just says, wow, this doesn't make sense. This is not what I'm used to seeing. I'm going to report this. And I think that what we all have to get over is political correctness. Get over that sense of political correctness. You're not going to get in trouble for anybody, and nobody's going to think badly of you if you report something that didn't turn out to be suspicious in the end. It didn't pan out. On the other hand, if you see something and you don't report it, and it does turn out to be a big problem, and people do die as a result, you're going to feel pretty bad about it. So see something, say something.
The Pentagon is talking about a major overhaul of their retirement system, getting rid of the pension plan and replacing it with a 401k style plan. We talked about this with some of our listeners in the military. A lot of them, are uneasy about it. I'm just curious, from a recruiting standpoint, what kind of effect would that have, and also retaining people who join the military?
Well, look, I've got a problem with all of the defense cuts. Not that they're not going to happen. They are going to happen. But if we are going to cut defense by the kinds of hundreds of billions of dollars that people are talking about, let's rethink the whole thing from the very beginning. Don't think you can just cut back a little bit here and there. Maybe cut back on pay and you're going to be okay. Or cut back on spare parts and training and it's going to be just fine. It's not. The kinds of numbers they're talking about are so significant that you have to do major rethinks. When I came in the Pentagon with the Reagan administration, where there had been defense cuts in the Carter administration, you looked around and you saw ships that couldn't sail and planes that couldn't fly because they didn't have the spare parts or the fuel. You had pilots who didn't have the training hours to fly the planes. Right. You had, every time you had a tank, you had another one sitting next to it that was cannibalized for spare parts. And we had some of our young enlisted people, men and women, were eligible for food stamps. They were making so little. So I think you've got to rethink. Do you want to give up some missions? Do we want to get out of Europe? Okay, maybe. Do we want to go away from an all-volunteer force and go back to a draft? We can save money that way. All those kinds of things we've got to think about, because you're not going to get the cuts you're talking about doing, that Hill's talking about doing in the White House, and everyone else is talking about doing by canceling, a tank procurement program.
Okay, so then this should be on the table is what you're saying, because that's the idea behind this, is that if you really want to save some of those missions or parts or whatever, you can't be bogged down by having to pay people who are
No, I'm not
retired
saying
at the age
that.
of
What I'm
45.
saying is that as you reconsider everything is already on the table, face it. What you need to do is have some definite rules in plan. You don't take servicemen and women who have fought and died for this country and say, okay, no benefits for you. Or you don't take people who've been wounded and permanently impaired from fighting for their country in Afghanistan or Iraq and say, sorry, we're going to just cut back on your benefits. You're not going to get the kind of treatment you need. You need to go, you owe certain obligations as a nation, whether it's George Washington talking about it or Abraham Lincoln or the President of the United States today. You owe things to the men and women who have served in this military in good faith, and particularly those who have been injured and the families who were left disadvantaged as a result of their loved ones and their family members dying or incapacitated. You owe that as your bottom line. You don't ever give that up. You've got to make sure you take care of that. And then let's step back and say, okay, maybe new recruits, maybe there is going to be a different system. All right, fine. Maybe we have to go to an all-volunteer. Go away from an all-volunteer force to a draft force. But think of that rationally. Don't just start nipping a little here, nipping a little there. Understand that your initial commitment, your first commitment, is to those people who have served their country in good faith and have sacrificed for their country, and then start talking about the rest.
Well, thank you so much, KT, for being here.
Pleasure.